Welcome to the Forensic Brief. I'm Keith Jensen. Have you ever heard that saying that a little knowledge can be dangerous? It actually originates from Alexander Pope's An Essay on Criticism from 1709. The original form is, "A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Pierian spring." Now, Pope's warning was that shallow knowledge breeds false confidence and poor judgment. And few things illustrate its relevance more starkly than the topic of law enforcement. Unfortunately, most citizens' so-called spring of knowledge for law enforcement is nothing more than their own limited exposure to it, like getting pulled over for a traffic infraction or seeing incidents covered by the news, which is mostly facile, ignorant, and misleading. And the consequences of this are tangible. A public already uninformed is further lulled into complacency by narratives that flatter their ignorance, and it actively obstructs the desperately needed evolution in law enforcement in this country. And here's just one example. Anchor and reporter Raphael James with WCSC in Charleston, South Carolina, published a report on July 25, 2025, where his stated purpose is to teach you what your rights are on a traffic stop. He is framing his entire report around the traffic stop of Rashad Abdullah by the Charleston, South Carolina police. He includes Rashad's video and plays just seconds of what was probably a 15 or 20-minute interview with Rashad. But he never includes the details of the stop itself. Mr. James only states the traffic stop was initiated due to expired tags, and provides no context to Rashad's video, and leaves the audience thinking he probably deserved the felony resisting charge he received. But as I will explain, not only did Rashad's actions not meet the requirements of the felony resisting law, but the officers did in fact violate Rashad's rights, and Mr. James's report fails at its mission. Here it is.
Thousands of people are pulled over by law enforcement every single day. But when those blue lights come on, do you know your rights? Can you be placed in handcuffs without them saying you're under arrest? If you're not under arrest, are you free to go? Can you question the police? Tonight, I break down the crucial and often confusing difference between being detained and being arrested and what you can do to ensure your own safety.
You said I'm not. Am I under arrest? What is this? What is your name? You said, am I under arrest? What am I under arrest for? What am I under arrest? But what am I? You're gonna be dog banned. I'm recording. Put your hands behind your back. But what am I being under arrest for? Put your hands behind your back. I'm just asking questions, sir. Put your hands behind your back. What am I doing? What are y'all doing?
Put your hands behind your back. Do it now.
I'm under arrest. Am I under arrest?
You're being detained.
For what?
Put your hands behind your back.
For what?
It started as a traffic stop for expired tags and ended with Rashad Abdullah face down on the road. It may look disturbing, but lawyers I talk to say if an officer says put your hands behind your back, you have to do it. Now, Abdullah is facing felony charges of resisting arrest. Do you feel that's an appropriate charge?
No, I wasn't resisting arrest. You can see on the video that I wasn't resisting arrest, just simply asking questions. Even in those videos, I was treated nasty, but I still was positive. I still was respectful to them. But it's just with them, they get irate and they get angry and abuse power for no reason.
Questions, your hands behind your back.
At least 3 times in this video, Abdullah was told to put his hands behind his back.
I'm under arrest.
We hear him ask 4 times if he was under arrest. Then finally, a voice informs him,
Being detained.
But what does that mean? Clearly, he's not free to go, but is he under arrest? Attorney Stephen Futerall says for most people, there is a very thin line between being detained and being arrested.
And in a regular person's mind, if I'm handcuffed, I'm arrested. They're not lawyers. They don't understand the distinction between detention and arrest. Nobody would understand that unless they had a law degree or they were a law enforcement officer or a judge.
So here's the breakdown, according to Futerall. To arrest you, police have to have probable cause to charge you with a crime. Your Miranda rights must be read to you. You'll most likely be placed into handcuffs. You will be taken to jail and formally charged. They must tell you why you're being arrested. If they do not, under South Carolina law, that officer could be charged with a felony. But to detain you, The police just have to have a reasonable suspicion that a crime has occurred. You are not free to go, but at this time you are not under arrest. And the whole "you have the right to remain silent" phrase you see on TV, they don't have to read you your Miranda rights because at this time you are not under arrest. You can be handcuffed for the safety of the officer, and what's more, if you're just being detained, they don't even have to tell you why.
It seems like any officer can just go around willy-nilly detaining people.
So, on the one hand, the answer is, yeah, it would seem that if an officer wanted to do so, they could sort of, and I'm not saying these officers did it, but they could manufacture reasons, or no reasons at all, to detain somebody and start investigating things with no reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime is being committed.
Because the burden is so low, or the standard is so low on detaining someone, an officer could question the individual and get information that can be used against them in the court of law and do so legally and not violate their rights, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's one of the downfalls of the differences between detainment and arrest, because they could do that.
South Carolina State Senator for District 42, Dion Tedder, says he would like to see legislation passed that would take away any ambiguity surrounding police encounters.
One of the things we could do is mandate that if an officer pulls somebody over, if they're going to detain them, they have to, 1, inform them that they're being detained, 2, tell them why they're being detained, and then 3, let them know whether or not they're free to leave.
Tedder, also an attorney, says citizens need to know their rights and also when to exercise them. He recommends not trying to fight your case on the roadside where the cop is king. Instead, he says, doing all the right things during the traffic stop can improve your chances of fighting any injustice in court. But he warns standing on your constitutional rights can come with unwanted consequences.
But I think there's a way to do that, remain respectful and say, look, I'm not answering any questions. I've done nothing wrong. But you have to know that by doing that, what could happen, they could just arrest you and charge you with something. And now you go, you have a night in jail, bond hearing the next morning. You didn't do anything, but, for some people, it's not worth it because you could lose your job, lose a scholarship for students that are in school just because you were simply charged with something. And then the way the backlog in the court system, it may be, 6-7 months before you even get it resolved.
But what am I being under arrest for?
But in those moments when an officer perceives it as you being aggressive or obstructing them, particularly in that video, when he was tackled to the ground, I think that was unnecessary. He was not moving, he was standing still. There was no need to take him to the ground. Perhaps maybe just answer his question, right? Tell him, hey, he said, why am I what's happening?
Abdullah agrees and says what happened to him never should have happened.
We can all be kind to one another. The golden rule is treat others how you want to be treated. So why you wouldn't want to be slammed on the ground? You wouldn't want to be treated like that. So why treat other people like that?
We reached out to the Charleston Police Department who performed the traffic stop for comment. So far, they have not responded.
Mr. James completely ignored the details of Rashad's incident. You know, the what, when, where, why, and who that are the basic tenets of journalism. Just because the focus of this piece is to teach you your rights, that does not exclude his journalistic responsibility to provide all of the pertinent information about the incident that Mr. James is using for his report. Mr. James says things like this.
Lawyers I talk to say, if an officer says put your hands behind your back, you have to do it.
Now, I'm not suggesting that anyone should resist or argue with an officer when they give a command like that, but rather be aware of the authority behind it and not assume it is just merely because an officer says it. Mr. James' words do not actually educate. They condition and reinforce the dangerous belief that whatever a cop says or does is automatically correct or lawful, thereby skewing the after-the-fact conversations in favor of the police and redirecting narratives that the only role of the public is obedience, and that we are helpless in correcting any legitimate bad behavior by those who are supposed to protect and serve. The truth is, police authority is not absolute. Every command, every action, every detainment and arrest is bound by law, case law, and civil rights. And the public should absolutely be aware of that. But apparently, it is not going to come from journalists who have neither the knowledge nor the care to actually convey complete and accurate information to the public they serve. We definitely have a tell to the judge mentality in this country, which explicitly leaves no room for questioning anything law enforcement does. They are not exempt from lack of knowledge or corruption, just because of a presumed bravery or inherent empathy for the job. We severely scrutinize politicians in this country all the time. And they supposedly chose their career to help and serve their community as well, correct? What makes cops different? Nothing. And unfortunately, most people are just simply not aware that every single day, law enforcement is executing their duties with ignorance, bias, and malice. Now, what Attorney Feudal said was less like neutral legal analysis and more like a hedge, an exercise in professional overcaution that, intentionally or not, grants law enforcement the benefit of every doubt, while leaving citizens' rights perpetually unresolved. And with a straight face, he says,
nobody would understand that unless they had a law degree, or they were a law enforcement officer or a judge.
That is a statement that manages to both hoard clarity and deny its existence, all while he is participating in a news piece explicitly about teaching you your rights. Rights, by the way, that the Constitution states shall not be infringed. And sure, you could say, well, if and when the cops do violate your rights, sue them. That's nothing but a warm blanket of ignorance and denial, when we should be focused on actual knowledge that is as easy to find as this video you're watching right now. So how about instead we stop greenlighting or conveniently ignoring this behavior just because we think cops have a dangerous job, or we think of them as heroes, or because we're too scared to say something? Or maybe we've convinced ourselves that we do not or cannot possibly know the limits of their authority. But guess what? I do. And so do thousands of other people. It is not difficult to learn, and it's not secret information. It is state and local laws, case law, and civil rights. The information one needs to have a deep understanding of what police can and cannot do, and the systemic malfeasance committed by them every single day, is free and readily available to anyone willing to look. Information that proves the devastating truth of how broken law enforcement actually is. So those who are not interested in this information or choose blind faith are probably the same people who are among the millions that fall victim to gift card scammers. Or they themselves are every bit as rotten as the bad apples. They're spectators who thrill at the abuse of power because it lets them indulge in their own malice from the sidelines. Law enforcement is the only profession in the world that is responsible for preserving your rights in life or taking them away. But yet they receive only 6 months of initial training. And the internal disciplinary structure and activity within departments across the country is shrouded behind a thick, velvety blue curtain. I have asked this question a million times, and no one has ever been able to give me a logical answer. Why does the person who cuts my hair go to school longer than a cop? I welcome any attempts by anyone to provide a well thought out and logical answer via email or in the comments below. If that does actually occur, it will be the subject of one of the next videos. Now, what Senator Tedder said in this piece is the closest thing to reasonable and in alignment with civil rights. But as a politician, he's definitely still pulling punches. Oh, and by the way, I think we should definitely stop with the gang mentality. That D next to the senator's title should not be as important as most people make it out to be. I'm not an elephant, a donkey, or a sheep, are you? We as a society will get nowhere if people are more focused on set tripping than logic and problem solving. Okay, back to the senator.
One of the things we could do is mandate that if an officer pulls somebody over, if they're going to detain them, they have to, 1, inform them that they're being detained, 2, tell them why they're being detained, and then 3, let them know whether or not they're free to leave.
Now, even though it could have been stated much more succinctly, this is completely in line with constitutional rights. But to be honest, Senator, we should not be focusing on drafting more laws. The Supreme Court, through case law, has laid out quite clearly that the action of every single officer must be objectionably reasonable. But with nearly every police academy in the country not being longer than 6 months or 1,200 hours, and only spending anywhere from 12 to 40 hours tops on constitutional law and civil rights, the overwhelming amount of bad police incidents proves they do not even think about reasonableness until they are sitting in a lawyer's conference room for a deposition, staring down the lens of a camera, looking like the incompetent and vocational victims that they are. But if Senator Tedder actually takes some initiatives on legislation that can effectively curtail some bad policing, then maybe I'm all for it. But after that band-aid is applied, he and his colleagues on both sides of the aisle need to create legislation that dramatically overhauls the state's academy curriculum. This is one of the biggest problems on the political side of policing. Senators and representatives, most of whom are lawyers, see specific issues with law enforcement and then try to use law to correct policing when they just need to focus on the source. Putting yet another law on the books that cadets are just going to not learn in a chaotic, paramilitary, toxic, antiquated 6-month certificate program is not the solution. Now, with police interactions, most people really do not want to argue with a cop on the side of the road, whereas Mr. James puts it, the cop is king. But no one is not going to at least ask questions about what is happening to them when they are in a situation like Rashad's. The behavior by these cops was absolutely not executed with reasonableness. It is actually ridiculousness. Now let's do what Mr. James neglected to do and provide all of the information pertinent to your civil rights and the details of Rashad's incident. On March 19, 2025, as Rashad was pulling out of a gas station in Charleston, South Carolina, he noticed an officer that was parked at the pump pull up behind him. The officer followed Rashad for a mile or two, and then once Rashad got on the interstate, the officer pulled him over. The officer informed him that his tag was expired and asked him for his license and registration. The only documents Rashad had with him at the time was his passport and business documents he recently registered with the county. Now, according to Rashad, the officer refused to even look at his passport or paperwork and just asked again for the license. And Rashad again told the officer that all he had with him was his passport. Already acting impatient, it is at that point Rashad informs me that the officer reached into the car, opened the door, and pulled Rashad out. Rashad then started recording on his phone, and that is where his video picks up from. Now, I chose this incident for a very specific reason. To the ignorant and uninformed, the mere fact that Rashad had expired tags and didn't have his license and registration on him is enough to make them tune out or stop caring, or worse, convince themselves that he earned the violent takedown and felony resisting charge that followed. But he didn't. That is not conjecture or opinion. That is fact. There are countless incidents where police harm completely innocent people. In addition to the several that I've covered here on this channel, thousands more just like it are just a search away here on YouTube or Google. They happen every single day. But it is just as critical that we call out misconduct even when the person targeted did commit some sort of infraction. Because if your outrage depends on the victim's perfection, then it's not outrage. It's tribalism. And that is precisely what allows abuse of power to thrive. Some people actually get a thrill watching someone they deem a bad guy get roughed up by cops, as if brutality is justice when it happens to someone they don't like. Not only is that logic beneath the dignity of a free society, it is flat out illegal. And those in that tribe should also realize that those same excessive tactics that they cheer for are often the ones that end up weakening prosecutions, getting legit charges tossed, or even giving the criminal some sort of financial windfall. There is no moral, legal, or practical reason to celebrate law enforcement's abuse of power, ever. Doing so doesn't make you tough on crime. It just makes you complicit in a broken system. Now here is why felony resisting never happened. Rashad was pulled over for expired tags and wasn't able to provide the required documents to the officer. Rashad was scared and confused because, like most people, he wasn't completely aware of what cops can and cannot do, and what he must and must not do. Now, I know you've probably heard the saying, ignorance is not an excuse, but that could only be reasonably invoked here if we were talking about a specific law. Something like, Rashad didn't know expired tags were illegal. But that's silly, that's not what this is. Rashad was questioning the officer's actions and intent, which he has every right to do. He can ask a question, and any officer acting reasonably would answer his question, not take him to the ground. Especially given the totality of circumstances, which were, he was out of the car, there was multiple officers present, there was even a canine at the ready, and Rashad was not acting violent or a danger to anyone. Which, by way of common sense, brings us right to U.S. Supreme Court case law that all officers must abide by. Graham v. Connor. The amount of force used by officers must be objectionably reasonable and proportional to the situation. Specifically, these three things that are commonly referred to as the Graham factors. 1. The severity of the crime. 2. The immediate threat the suspect poses. And 3. Whether the suspect was actively resisting or attempting to flee. The crime was a traffic violation, one of the lowest level offenses that exist. He posed no threat to himself, the officers, or the public. And the actual legal definition of what he was doing as he was standing there asking his question is passive resistance, not active resistance. And he certainly was not attempting to flee. So the very thing that all peace officers must know and abide by was ignored due to impatience, ignorance, ego. Given all of those things, there is absolute zero justification for a reasonable officer to ignore Rashad's questions and subsequently take him to the ground, which appears to be the catalyst for the felony resisting charge, for which one must knowingly and willfully assault, beat, or wound an officer when the person is resisting an arrest. Now, think about this. The last thing said to Rashad was, "You are being detained." And after he said for what, he was taken to the ground. Now, this was a traffic stop, so it is obvious and already established that Rashad was being detained. Why would the officer who pulled Rashad out of the car continue to be unreasonable, ignore his questions, and then another officer just yells out, "You are being detained"? So they themselves established that he was not under arrest. Now take a look at the felony resisting law again. Knowingly and willfully assault, beat, or wound an officer. None of that happened. When the person is resisting an arrest, it wasn't an arrest. And his passive resistance was brought on solely by the unreasonable actions of the officers. Even if the cop that took him down got a cut or was inadvertently kicked by Rashad, that does not meet the knowingly and willfully burden in the law. The reasonable thing to do here would have been to answer his fucking question. And then, if their plan was to detain Rashad in cuffs because letting a registration lapse or forgetting documents is super scary, then just tell him, "We are detaining you in cuffs," and then one of the several other officers could have simply grabbed his other arm, put it behind his back, and placed the cuffs on him like is commonly done every fucking day. He wasn't trying to get away from the officers. He wasn't threatening or screaming. He was visibly scared and asking the same question over and over. That's all. The Graham factors are systematically ignored by law enforcement everywhere. Departments all over this country have almost a unified pattern in practice whereby they skirt the standards set forth and or cover up violations of it. But there are two other case laws that have equal weight on officers. They are Pennsylvania v. Mims and Terry v. Ohio. But unlike Graham v. Connor, cops proudly and eagerly invoke those to a fault on citizens all the time. And most citizens do not even know what case law means, nor do they have a responsibility to know it like they would traffic laws or tax law. So a citizen who doesn't understand that cops can essentially remove people from the car on a routine traffic stop must be communicated with in a reasonable manner, not treated like a fucking murderer from the jump. Pennsylvania v. Mims is what allowed the officer to instruct Rashad to exit his vehicle, not necessarily reach in his car, open the door, and yank him out. So if officers invoke case law to have somebody exit the vehicle, they better fucking follow the standards set forth in Graham v. Connor and stop being ignorant, lazy, ego-driven, and evil. The demonstrably needed academy and training reformation will only ever happen if the citizens actually become more informed. If the amount of people who keep up with the Kardashians or play fantasy football knew exactly how bad the law enforcement institution is in this country, change would occur a lot quicker. One more important thing about Mr. James's report.
Your Miranda rights must be read to you.
This is not true. As defined by Miranda v. Arizona case law, cops are not required to read you your Miranda rights upon arrest. They are only required to read the Miranda warning to you prior to a custodial interrogation, regardless of whether you are explicitly told you are under arrest or not. As with nearly everything in law enforcement, the reasonableness standard is used here as well. If a reasonable person believes their freedom was restricted to the level of an arrest, then officers must provide the Miranda warning prior to any questioning, whether you are handcuffed on the side of the road, back of a police car, or at the police station. But what is more important to know is this. You do not have those rights because a cop magically invokes them for you. You always have the right to remain silent, and you always have the right to an attorney. If you get stopped by police, you do not have to answer any questions, ever. You do not have to tell them how your day is, where you're coming from, where you're going to. You never, ever have to talk to police, ever. And I know a lot of people are like, well, what's the big deal if I tell them I'm coming from the market on Maple Street? Well, if a few minutes ago there was a shoplifting suspect leaving that store in a car that is just merely the same color as yours, you're screwed. I have seen this type of scenario happen thousands of times. to completely innocent people. And it has caused everything from just being scared and inconvenienced for an hour, to being unlawfully arrested, losing your job, and it taking 6 months and $20,000 to clear your name. I constantly hear people say, stuff like this is going to happen. A few officers acting up, getting it wrong, it's inevitable. There's a lot of good officers out there. I do understand that sentiment, and that is actually what I used to think, until I began looking into every single questionable incident I came across. And then even the ones that did not appear to be questionable. I was shocked how often police were wrong due to lack of knowledge or how much they abused their power. Now I cannot even keep up with the amount of incidents relating to police malfeasance. Even with the top couple hundred cop watchers, activists, journalists who specialize in law enforcement accountability and reformation, it is not possible to cover every occurrence of bad policing. That is way more than a few bad apples. That does not mean there are not good officers out there, but trust me, there are not enough. Unfortunately, law enforcement is overly politicized, so I understand videos on social media relating to policing are a bit more scrutinized than videos on, let's say, woodworking or physics or auto repair and music. So I think it is important to make clear my motives are the same as channels like 4ENSIC Furniture, SciShow, Raymond Ray's Repairs, and Digging the Greats. It is to simply share my knowledge and contribute to the improvement of law enforcement in this country. I am not a cop hater, but currently, there is a lot to hate about cops. It is the unacceptable number of bad police incidents that has inspired me to learn everything I can possibly learn about law enforcement, and then share that information with anyone who's willing to listen. So, thank you for listening. And thank you, Rashard, for sharing your story with me. When it comes to police, know your rights, always record, and never talk.
It seems like any officer can just go around willy-nilly detaining people.
Thank you.
I'm going to arrest your mother.
Then we're going to end this.